The first sign that something extraordinary was about to happen came quietly at first. People noticed strange shapes in the sky, glimmering and moving in ways that defied any airplane or drone. Scientists rushed to study them, while journalists scrambled to report the unusual events. Governments initially tried to calm the public, insisting it was a weather anomaly or a test of new technology. But no explanation fit. The shapes were too precise, too deliberate. They hovered silently above major cities, casting shadows that stretched for miles. It was impossible to ignore. The world was about to change forever. Then the message arrived. It was not delivered in a language that humans could immediately understand. Instead, it came as a broadcast across all communication channels simultaneously: television, radio, the internet, even satellites. Every screen flickered at once, and a voice echoed in a tone that felt both mechanical and strangely musical. The message was simple and direct. The Galactic Council, rulers of countless worlds, had arrived, and they demanded Earth's immediate surrender. Humanity was to submit, share all knowledge, and accept their authority or face annihilation. Panic could have swept the globe. People could have run, governments could have collapsed, and chaos could have consumed cities. But that is not what happened. Instead, humanity paused. At first, there was fear, of course. Fear is natural when faced with the unknown. But it was quickly replaced by something remarkable: curiosity and calm determination. People began to talk, to debate, to wonder what this really meant. News networks ran endless coverage, but instead of hysteria, there was awe. Social media buzzed not with cries of surrender, but with memes, jokes, and clever observations about the incredible size of the alien fleet dot from the streets of small towns to the skyscrapers of megacities. Humans looked up at the enormous ships, hovering silently above. They were unlike anything Earth had ever produced. Some were longer than entire cities, their surfaces shimmering with technology that humans could only dream of. Yet, instead of cowering, people watched with fascination. Children pointed at the sky in wonder, adults whispered in amazement, and even world leaders found themselves taking a deep breath, forced to confront the unimaginable reality. Humanity had been warned: surrender or be destroyed. And yet, instead of panic, the world united in a quiet, almost defiant attention. Scientists began to analyze the ships. They could not understand how the vessels defied gravity or why their propulsion systems made no sound. Engineers sketched designs, trying to make sense of the impossible, while physicists debated theories that challenged centuries of established knowledge. Every discovery, every calculation, only made humans realize how little they truly understood about the universe. But instead of feeling powerless, humanity felt alive. For the first time, the entire species was looking outward, not just at the sky, but at the possibilities beyond it. Meanwhile, world leaders faced an unprecedented dilemma. A message from the Galactic Council was absolute. Earth could not hope to resist in conventional terms. Any military confrontation seemed futile. Entire nations with advanced weapons looked tiny and fragile against the backdrop of the massive alien fleet. But they also recognized something important. Humans were not predictable. Humans had a way of finding hope and clever solutions, even in the most impossible situations. So instead of surrendering immediately, the leaders decided to study, to observe, and to plan. Every word they spoke in private meetings reflected a deep understanding. The enemy was powerful, but humanity had resilience. Across the world, the public reacted in ways that surprised even the most skeptical observers. Streets were not filled with riots or panic. Instead, people gathered in parks, on rooftops, and along rivers, staring at the sky. Conversations were not about fear, but about curiosity. Could they communicate? What did the aliens want? How far could their technology reach? Some joked openly, suggesting absurd scenarios about alien bureaucracy or cosmic paperwork. Others speculated about Earth's place in the wider galaxy. In every corner of the globe, humans were talking, thinking, and imagining. In a strange way, the threat had united them more than any previous disaster ever could. The first broadcast from the Galactic Council was formal and imposing. It explained that Earth had been noted for its unpredictable species, one that had survived countless challenges despite limited technology compared to galactic standards. The message emphasized the Council's power and the futility of resistance. Yet humans did not respond with fear. Leaders issued a calm statement acknowledging the message, assuring citizens that diplomacy would be the first priority. There were no panic-buying sprees, no mass evacuations. Humanity chose to respond not with chaos, but with observation and strategy. Even ordinary people began to play their part. Schools held special lessons about what this could mean. Citizens documented the alien ships with cameras, drones, and satellites. Amateur scientists and hobbyists attempted to decode patterns and signals, while ordinary workers went about their lives, demonstrating a steady determination that impressed even the experts. Humans treated the arrival of the Galactic Council not just as a threat, but as a challenge one to be met with cleverness, patience, and unity bowed as the hours passed. The size of the fleet became clear. Ships extended far beyond the atmosphere, visible from almost every point on Earth. Yet no attacks were made. Instead, the aliens observed silently, scanning and analyzing. Humanity had no idea what the Council saw or thought, but they did notice that the aliens expected fear, and they were not getting it. Across continents, families gathered, friends met on rooftops, and strangers shared stories under the shadow of the enormous ships above. It was a strange time, fear and wonder coexisting, but with an unmistakable human confidence that nothing could break. One moment that captured the spirit of the time came in an unexpected place. A small group of children, curious and fearless, pointed toy spaceships at the real fleet. They giggled and pretended to defend Earth with their toys. A local journalist captured the moment, and soon the image spread across the world. It became a symbol. Humanity was not ready to bow. Even in the face of a force that could destroy entire cities, humans retained their humor, their creativity, and their courage. It reminded everyone that fear alone could not define their response. By the end of the first day, humans had learned something important. They had seen the impossible, heard the demands of the galaxy's most powerful council, and still found a way to respond with calm and curiosity. Scientists continued their analysis, leaders continued their deliberations, and citizens continued their daily lives, all under the watchful gaze of alien technology. Humanity was unbroken. They were aware of the risk, but they also understood a truth that even the Council might underestimate. Fear alone could not control them. As night fell, cities lit up in celebration of human resilience rather than in fear. People shared stories, recorded their observations, and looked up at the hovering ships with a mixture of awe and quiet defiance. Across continents and cultures, humans were united by one simple fact. They had been confronted by something far beyond their comprehension, and yet they were not afraid. Instead, they were alive, thinking, and ready to face whatever came next. The first day ended not with destruction, but with reflection. Humanity had survived the initial encounter. They had learned that even the most powerful forces in the galaxy could not easily intimidate them. And perhaps most importantly, they realized something that would guide them in the days to come. Unity, curiosity, humor, and courage were as much a weapon as any technology. The Galactic Council had demanded surrender, but humanity had chosen a different path. They had chosen to observe, to learn, and to prepare not in fear, but in confidence. And so, as the stars shimmered above and the alien fleet hovered silently, humanity watched and waited. They did not know what the Council would do next, but they did know one thing. They were not going to be controlled or frightened. They were human. They were unpredictable. And they had just begun to show the galaxy what that meant. The second day began with the world still holding its breath. The alien ships remained in the sky, motionless but imposing, casting enormous shadows across cities, fields, and oceans. Humanity had survived the first day without panic, but now came the moment everyone had been anticipating, the Council's ultimatum. It was delivered in the same simultaneous broadcast as before, but this time the message was sharper, clearer, and impossible to ignore. Earth had to surrender completely. Every nation was to hand over its technology, its governance, and even its decisions to the Council. Resistance, the message warned, would be met with absolute destruction. Newsrooms buzzed with activity. Analysts tried to interpret the Council's tone, while military experts calculated the odds of survival. Governments debated in emergency meetings, some in hidden bunkers, others in massive conference rooms designed for crisis. Leaders weighed the unimaginable, surrendering humanity's freedom or risking total annihilation. They understood the Council's position. The fleet was overwhelming. A single ship could wipe out entire continents. Yet, beneath the surface of fear, a quiet defiance began to grow. Humans had faced impossible odds before, and they had always found ways to survive. The Council had underestimated that instinct. Ordinary people reacted in ways that were both surprising and uniquely human. Streets did not fill with chaos. Markets stayed open, schools held their lessons, and cities continued functioning. Instead of panic, humans shared information, theories, and strategies. Social media exploded with discussion. Some users joked about the Council's obsession with Earth politics, suggesting that alien leaders were just bureaucrats at heart. Others speculated wildly about the aliens' weaknesses or about the strange patterns in their ships' movements. Across continents, a sense of community began to form. People were frightened, yes, but they were also curious, and in a subtle way, united. World leaders struggled to craft a response. They wanted to protect humanity, but how could any human government hope to negotiate with beings capable of destroying the planet in an instant? Diplomats worked day and night, trying to craft messages that were respectful yet firm. Scientists provided technical reports, suggesting ways to observe and communicate with the Council. And everywhere, humans continued their daily lives, refusing to let fear dominate their decisions. Even as the ultimatum demanded surrender, the world moved forward with cautious determination. Meanwhile, experts began to notice something strange. The Council expected fear, panic, and submission, but humans were responding differently. People joked, even in serious meetings. There were discussions about how to outsmart the Council in playful ways, like offering absurd solutions that highlighted human creativity. Some suggested sending a delegation to explain Earth bureaucracy in an exaggerated, humorous way. Others simply laughed at the sheer audacity of the Council, finding relief in humor when faced with terror. It was not disrespect. It was human resilience, the ability to face the unknown with intelligence, wit, and courage. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly to understand the alien technology. The ships were incredible, far beyond anything humans had imagined. They seemed to bend physics, moving silently and hovering effortlessly. Sensors detected energy fields that humans could barely comprehend in attempts to analyze communication. Signals yielded results that were both fascinating and perplexing. Yet, instead of despair, these discoveries inspired hope. Humans realized that even in the face of overwhelming power, their curiosity and ingenuity remained their greatest assets. They began to plan, not for a fight, but for survival, observation, and understanding. The public, too, became part of the response. In parks, people gathered with cameras and binoculars, documenting every moment. Communities held discussions, sharing insights, sketches, and theories. Students created models of the alien ships, trying to understand their structure and function. Writers and artists imagined stories about first contact, turning fear into creativity. This collective focus on observation and learning was a form of resistance in itself. Humans could not hope to match the Council's power, but they could match their own courage and intelligence. Amid all this activity, the Council remained silent in its judgment. Their ships floated like monuments of power, massive and unwavering, scanning every corner of the planet. They expected to see panic, but instead they saw humans going about their lives with focus and calm. They saw people working together, sharing information, and using humor to cope with fear. They noticed leaders thinking carefully, scientists experimenting tirelessly, and ordinary citizens observing, analyzing, and communicating. The Council realized that Earthlings were unlike any species they had encountered before. Diplomats decided to craft a response. They did not offer surrender, but neither did they provoke conflict. Instead, they expressed a desire to communicate, to understand, and to cooperate where possible, while making it clear that humans would not give up their freedom. The message was polite, calm, and clever. It acknowledged the Council's power, but reminded them that Earth had survived countless challenges before. It highlighted the ingenuity, adaptability, and resilience of humans. And it hinted, without arrogance, that intimidation alone would not work. The reaction to this message was immediate and mixed. Some factions of the Council were outraged, expecting submission and fear. Others were intrigued, realizing that humans were unpredictable and unusually resourceful. Across the world, ordinary people celebrated. Citizens shared the diplomatic message online, dissecting its phrasing, laughing at subtle jokes embedded in formal words, and feeling a shared pride in humanity's clever response. It was a moment that reminded everyone that courage did not always roar. Sometimes it smiled, thought carefully, and refused to bow. Meanwhile, scientists continued their work. They discovered patterns in the alien fleet's movements, signals that hinted at communication methods, and even small flaws in the ship's energy fields. While these discoveries could not directly match the Council's technology, they provided a glimpse into how the humans could understand and adapt. Engineers experimented with simulations, trying to model how humans might interact with the fleet, and students everywhere contributed ideas that ranged from imaginative to brilliant. Humans were learning quickly, and the Council was watching, realizing that intelligence and creativity could not be underestimated. Even as discussions continued, life on Earth went on. People went to work, children attended school, and communities maintained routines. Yet there was an underlying awareness. The Council's ultimatum hung over them like a silent storm. Every decision, every conversation, every observation was infused with a new sense of purpose. Humans were being tested not by force, but by expectation. The aliens expected panic, fear, and surrender. Humans gave them something else entirely: focus, resilience, and determination. In the evening, as the sun set, people gathered to watch the alien ships shimmer in the sky. Across continents, citizens shared moments of reflection. Families discussed the meaning of courage. Students debated how humans might communicate more effectively. Scientists marveled at the complexity of the technology. And quietly, everyone recognized a simple truth: surrender was not the only option. Humanity had something the Council could not destroy: its ingenuity, its unity, and its will to survive. The night was filled with both uncertainty and hope. Messages continued to flow from governments and scientists, analyzing every signal from the fleet. Citizens documented every sighting, every sound, every flicker of light. Communities held discussions, sharing ideas about how to respond if the council escalated. And yet, amid all this preparation, life continued. Humans were not paralyzed by fear. They were energized by the challenge. They knew the council was powerful, but they also knew that intelligence, creativity, and courage could never be measured in fleet size alone, not by the end of the second day. Humanity had learned more than just the scale of the threat. They had discovered something deeper. Fear could be met with calm, and demands could be met with clever resistance. They realized that humor, creativity, and unity were weapons just as important as technology. And they understood that the council, despite its overwhelming power, had underestimated them. Humans were not just surviving. They were adapting, observing, and learning in ways that no other species might have thought possible. As midnight approached, the world paused for a moment of quiet reflection. People looked up at the sky, at the massive ships that hung like silent monuments above them, and thought about what it meant to be human. They felt fear, yes, but it was accompanied by courage, curiosity, and a spark of defiance. Humanity was not going to surrender. They were not going to panic. Instead, they were going to observe, learn, and prepare, because that was what humans always did when faced with the unknown. And so, as the stars twinkled behind the alien fleet and the night stretched on, humanity stood united in a quiet, confident defiance. The council had demanded surrender, but humans had given something else entirely. Calm, clever resistance, and the first unmistakable sign that Earth would not be commanded so easily. The ultimatum had been received, but the response was clear. Humans were ready to face the galaxy, on their own terms, with courage, ingenuity, and a touch of humor that no alien fork. The third day began with a quiet sense of determination spreading across the planet. Humanity had survived the first shock and responded to the Council's ultimatum with calm intelligence and a touch of humor. Now, the question was what the Council would do next. The ships continued to hover above, massive and silent, observing everything below. Every movement of humans, every signal sent, every broadcast was being watched and analyzed. For the first time, the aliens seemed genuinely curious. Earth was not responding in the way they expected. There was no panic, no blind obedience, no mass chaos. Instead, there was calm, clever resistance, and an unmistakable human spirit that refused to bow. In laboratories, offices, and homes, humans worked tirelessly to understand the visitors. Scientists debated how the ships generated their immense power. Engineers tried to model the energy fields surrounding the vessels. Students, teachers, and amateur enthusiasts contributed ideas, theories, and simulations. People used every tool they had: computers, telescopes, satellites, and even simple sketches to try and make sense of what they were witnessing. Humanity had never been this focused, this united, and this determined. Fear was present, but it was transformed into curiosity and action. Meanwhile, governments continued their work behind closed doors. Diplomatic teams sent carefully worded messages, emphasizing a willingness to communicate while refusing to surrender. Military analysts studied potential scenarios, not with the aim of fighting, but to understand the limits of the alien power. Every decision, every plan, every observation reflected the same understanding. Humans were outmatched in raw power, but unmatched in creativity, adaptability, and resilience. These qualities were not just survival traits. They were defining features of the species itself. Across the world, ordinary people participated in a quiet global effort. Neighborhoods formed watch groups to track the movement of the ships. Communities shared data about energy readings, unusual lights, and patterns in the fleet's positioning. Artists sketched their interpretations of the ships, imagining what was inside and what might be guiding them. Children asked questions, sometimes simple, sometimes profound, that prompted adults to think deeply. Every person, in their own way, contributed to a growing understanding of the visitors. Humans were learning that survival was not just about weapons or power. It was about observation, collaboration, and thinking ahead. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, began to realize that Earth was unlike any other planet they had encountered. Their analysts had expected fear, chaos, and rapid surrender. Instead, they found intelligence, resilience, and humor. Humans were unpredictable, not only in action but in thought. They questioned assumptions, challenged authority, and adapted in ways the Council could not immediately anticipate. Their social structures, their creativity, and their ability to communicate quickly made them both fascinating and troubling to the alien observers. The Council began to wonder if intimidation alone could ever control such a species. At the same time, humans discovered patterns in the fleet that the aliens did not expect them to notice. Tiny shifts in light, subtle changes in positioning, and repeated energy pulses hinted at a system, a method, and possibly even communication attempts. Scientists realized that while the technology was far beyond human understanding, it was not incomprehensible. Through careful observation and collaboration, humans began decoding signals, mapping movement patterns, and predicting certain behaviors. It was slow work, but it was effective. The Council noticed these efforts and became increasingly cautious. The species they had assumed would panic was now learning about them, and learning fast. In cities and towns, life continued with a new rhythm. Humans balanced daily routines with the extraordinary presence above them. Markets remained open, offices continued work, and schools adapted lessons to include discussions about the arrival of the Galactic Council. People shared knowledge, worked together, and encouraged one another. Even in the face of possible destruction, humans found ways to maintain normalcy. This balance of ordinary life and extraordinary circumstance demonstrated a core human trait, the ability to persevere, to find calm and purpose, even in the most uncertain situations. The Council decided to test humanity further. Small drones were sent into the atmosphere to scan and observe humans more closely. They recorded everything: movement, communication, reactions. But instead of panic, humans responded with curiosity. They analyzed the drone's movement, speculated about their technology, and even found clever ways to interact with them. Some drones were tricked by simple optical illusions, while others were observed and documented meticulously. Humans were learning not just about the visitors, but about themselves, their strengths, their creativity, and their adaptability. Scientists made another remarkable discovery. Humans were capable of collective problem-solving on an unprecedented scale. When a pattern was observed, communities across continents shared data, compared notes, and collaborated to understand it. Solutions emerged that no single person could have predicted. The Council watched in astonishment as humans combined knowledge, technology, and imagination to analyze the alien fleet. It became increasingly clear that this species' unpredictability was its greatest strength. Fear could not control them, and sheer power could not intimidate them. Diplomats continued their careful work. They crafted messages that were polite, intelligent, and even subtly humorous. They acknowledged the Council's strength without showing weakness, and they reminded the aliens that Earth was a complex, unpredictable world. Every message was deliberate, designed to convey that humans were not surrendering, but they were willing to engage with intelligence and respect. These communications fascinated the Council. They had expected submission, but what they received was cleverness, strategy, and an unmistakable spark of defiance. Ordinary humans continued to inspire each other. Citizens shared stories, sketched observations, and speculated on what might come next. Communities formed discussion groups, analyzing every movement of the fleet. Even without formal scientific training, people contributed insights that helped scientists and diplomats alike. Humans were proving that intelligence was not limited to experts, and that courage could take many forms. They were demonstrating resilience, unity, and the power of collective action. By mid-afternoon, the council began to change its strategy. Instead of issuing more ultimatums, they observed more closely. They analyzed patterns of behavior, tried to understand communication attempts, and even questioned their own assumptions about Earth. This species, which they had considered primitive and insignificant, was teaching them something unexpected. Raw power alone does not control the intelligent and resilient. Observation, adaptation, and clever strategy could level the playing field in ways that brute force could not. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, humans maintained humor and perspective. Jokes circulated online, poking fun at the seriousness of the council's demands. Memes about alien bureaucracy and interstellar etiquette spread quickly, giving people a way to cope with fear. It was not disrespect. It was humanity's way of asserting that they would not be broken, that even in the presence of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, they retained control over their minds, their reactions, and their spirit. As evening approached, the first coordinated human analysis of the fleet was completed. Scientists, students, and citizens had mapped patterns of energy, movement, and communication. They had discovered subtle repetitions, tiny weaknesses, and even glimpses of how the council might think. This was a major breakthrough, achieved not by weapons or raw strength, but by intelligence, observation, and collaboration. It was a clear demonstration of what humans excelled at: learning quickly, adapting, and using creativity to solve problems. By nightfall, humanity had learned important lessons. They had learned to observe without panic, to communicate cleverly, to collaborate on a massive scale, and to maintain humor in the face of fear. The council, meanwhile, had learned something about humans that no fleet of ships or overwhelming firepower could ever teach. They were unpredictable, intelligent, and resilient in ways that could not be fully anticipated. Fear and intimidation alone would not work on this species. As the world reflected on the day's events, people realized that their response had been remarkable. They had survived, learned, and even inspired each other while under the shadow of the Galactic Council. Communities celebrated small victories, an observation made, a pattern recognized, a communication deciphered. It was a quiet, collective pride, but it was profound. Humans were not just waiting to be commanded. They were actively learning and preparing, using their strengths in intelligence, creativity, and unity. And so, as night fell and the massive alien ships shimmered against the stars, humanity remained undaunted. They were observing, learning, and growing stronger in ways that could not be measured by raw power. The council had assumed fear and submission, but what they found was courage, cleverness, and unbreakable unity. Humanity was unpredictable, resourceful, and resilient. And as the third day ended, it was clear that the planet below the fleet was no ordinary world. It was Earth, and it was ready to show the galaxy what humans were truly capable of. The fourth day began with a tension that was almost electric. After observing humanity for 3 days, the Galactic Council decided it was time for a more direct approach. A small delegation of alien representatives descended to Earth, choosing a remote location far from major cities. They landed in a wide valley surrounded by mountains, a natural amphitheater that made it easy for both humans and aliens to observe the encounter. Despite the incredible technology that brought the delegation down safely, the aliens moved with an elegance that was precise and deliberate. Almost ceremonial. Human leaders were nervous, but their preparation was thorough. Scientists, diplomats, and advisors worked together to ensure that the first meeting would show confidence without aggression. Security teams were present, but weapons were carefully concealed. The goal was communication, not confrontation. Citizens gathered at a safe distance, watching the landing on screens or through binoculars. There was a sense of excitement mixed with fear, but also a growing pride. Humanity had survived the initial shock, and now it was ready to meet the Council face to face. When the aliens finally emerged, it was clear that they were unlike any species humans had ever imagined. Their forms were sleek and radiant, their movements fluid and precise. Their faces, if they could be called faces, displayed expressions that humans could barely interpret. Communication was not initially through words, but through subtle energy pulses and gestures that seemed to convey meaning instantly. Scientists scrambled to decode these signals, but even without understanding every detail, humans felt the intelligence, awareness, and caution behind every action. The first human representatives approached carefully. They did not rush, they did not bow excessively, and they did not show fear. Instead, they moved with calm confidence, speaking clearly and observing every gesture. The aliens responded in kind, scanning the humans with what seemed to be curiosity and calculation. Every word and action mattered. Diplomats presented messages that were polite, clever, and carefully phrased. They acknowledged the Council's power without showing submission, demonstrating that humans could communicate with intelligence and respect simultaneously. As the encounter continued, small but significant interactions began to emerge. Humans asked questions about the Council's technology, about the energy that powered their ships, and even about the reason behind their arrival. The aliens responded in ways that were factual, but often indirect, revealing glimpses of their thinking. Without fully explaining it, humans noticed patterns, subtle repetitions, and the way the aliens adjusted their gestures based on human responses. It became clear that this first encounter was as much about observation as it was about communication. Both sides were learning about each other. One of the most remarkable aspects of the meeting was humanity's use of humor. Even in a situation that could have been terrifying, human representatives used subtle jokes, clever turns of phrase, and gentle wit to break the tension. The aliens did not seem to understand the humor fully, but they noticed the confidence behind it. This small display of humanity's spirit made it clear that intimidation would not work. The species they had assumed would panic under pressure was instead composed, intelligent, and surprisingly resilient. As the hours passed, humans and aliens began to establish a rhythm of interaction. Scientists demonstrated simple Earth technologies, not to boast, but to communicate ideas. The aliens responded with controlled gestures and energy pulses, suggesting understanding or asking for clarification. Diplomats continued to phrase their words carefully, conveying both respect and subtle reminders that Earth would not surrender its autonomy. The entire process was slow, deliberate, and fascinating. Humans were learning the alien language of gestures and energy patterns, while the Council was learning that humans were not easily intimidated or controlled. Meanwhile, ordinary people continued their role in observing and documenting the encounter. Amateur astronomers, students, and citizens with cameras and sensors recorded every movement of the delegation. Every observation was shared online, analyzed, and discussed. Communities debated possible meanings of alien gestures and energy patterns. Scientists compiled these observations, refining their understanding of the Council and helping leaders make informed decisions. Humanity's ability to work together across continents and cultures turned the entire species into a collective. Observer and analyst. By mid-afternoon, the aliens began to show something unexpected. They adjusted their movements, paused in certain gestures, and even seemed to mimic human expressions in subtle ways. It was as if they were attempting to understand humans, not just intellectually, but emotionally. This fascinated scientists and diplomats alike. Humans realized that intelligence alone might not define the Council's perception. They were also sensitive to behavior, confidence, and subtle cues. The delegation was learning, just as humans were learning. At one point, a small misunderstanding occurred. A human representative misinterpreted an alien gesture as aggressive. The moment was tense, but rather than escalating into conflict, humans paused, observed, and responded with calm clarification. The aliens, in turn, adjusted their behavior. This brief moment highlighted a crucial lesson. Patience, observation, and clear communication were as important as courage or intelligence. Humans were proving that even a species with far less raw power could navigate high-stakes interactions through wit, empathy, and careful thinking. As the day continued, humans began to notice that the aliens were testing them. Subtle questions were embedded in their gestures, pauses in their movement, and shifts in energy signals. These tests were not meant to harm, but to observe reactions, problem-solving, and creativity. Humans responded with calm analysis, sometimes subtly humorous replies, and always careful observation. Each reaction demonstrated the qualities that had allowed humanity to survive on Earth for millennia: adaptability, curiosity, intelligence, and courage. In the evening, after hours of careful observation and interaction, humans concluded the formal meeting. The delegation did not leave immediately, but hovered briefly, seemingly processing everything they had seen. Scientists and diplomats analyzed every movement and signal, comparing notes, refining models, and preparing for future interactions. Citizens around the world discussed what had happened, sharing insights, sketches, and theories. Humanity had not bowed, but neither had it provoked conflict. Instead, it had demonstrated intelligence, curiosity, and resilience, qualities that commanded attention even from the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The first encounter left both sides with new understanding. Humans learned that the Council was intelligent, careful, and methodical, but also somewhat rigid and unfamiliar with humor, empathy, and unpredictability. The aliens learned that humans were not easily intimidated, that they could communicate clever ideas even under pressure, and that they were capable of adapting quickly. Both sides left with a recognition of each other's strengths and limitations. For humans, it was a moment of quiet pride, showing the galaxy that they were more than their weapons or technology. They were a species defined by creativity, courage, and intelligence. After the delegation departed to rejoin the fleet, humans spent the evening reflecting on the encounter. Communities gathered, scientists debated, and ordinary citizens shared stories of what they had observed. Even small moments, a gesture that seemed like a question, a subtle response, or a clever phrase used in diplomacy, were celebrated. Humanity had not only survived the first direct contact, but had also proven that intelligence, courage, and subtle humor could earn respect in ways that force alone could not. By the end of the fourth day, it was clear that a new chapter had begun. Humans had faced the most powerful beings they had ever encountered, and had done so with intelligence, creativity, and courage. The Galactic Council had arrived expecting submission, but what they found was a species that refused to bow, that learned quickly, that observed patiently, and that could respond with cleverness and humor. Humanity was beginning to show the galaxy what made them unique: unpredictability, resilience, and a quiet, unshakable confidence. As night fell, humans across the world looked up at the massive ships hovering above, now familiar symbols of both challenge and curiosity. The first direct encounter had ended, but the lessons learned would guide humanity in the days to come. They had demonstrated that even in the face of unimaginable power, Courage, intelligence, and humor could create opportunities for understanding and respect. Humans had not surrendered. They had stood tall, and in doing so, they had begun to teach the council an unexpected truth. Power alone does not command respect. Creativity, courage, and intelligence do. And so, as the stars shimmered in the sky and the alien fleet continued to observe from above, humanity rested for the night, united, proud, and ready. The council had arrived expecting fear, but what they found was confidence, cleverness, and a species that could think, adapt, and respond in ways that no other civilization had seen. The encounter had ended, but the story was far from over. Humanity had shown the first glimpse of its true strength, not in weapons or technology, but in its spirit, its mind, and its heart. The fifth day began with a renewed energy across the planet. After the first direct encounter with the Galactic Council, humans were no longer just observers, they were participants. They had learned about the aliens' technology, gestures, and signals. More importantly, they had learned something about themselves. Their strength was not in brute force, but in intelligence, creativity, and unity. Governments, scientists, and ordinary citizens began to understand that surviving the Council's presence required clever strategy rather than panic or submission. Humanity was about to put its plans into action. In research centers around the world, scientists analyzed every detail of the aliens' ships and behavior. They studied energy fields, movement patterns, and communication methods. Engineers built models to test reactions, while mathematicians searched for predictability in seemingly random behaviors. Students and amateurs contributed as well, offering fresh perspectives that sometimes led to important discoveries. For the first time, humans felt they could predict certain actions of the Council, not perfectly, but enough to gain an advantage in knowledge. This realization was electrifying. It gave humanity hope, not hope that they could defeat the fleet in a fight, but hope that they could survive, adapt, and even influence events. Diplomats worked tirelessly to craft messages that were clever, polite, and firm. They knew that confrontation was dangerous, but intelligence and strategy could earn them respect. The messages were carefully constructed to show understanding, curiosity, and confidence without challenging the Council's authority too directly. Even small jokes, subtle hints of humor, or clever turns of phrase were embedded in formal language. These communications demonstrated that humanity would not submit blindly, and that intelligence, observation, and creativity could be as powerful as any weapon. Meanwhile, ordinary people continued to play their part. Across cities and towns, communities observed the ships, recorded unusual signals, and analyzed patterns. Citizens shared information through social networks, building a collective understanding of the fleet. Even small actions, like noting a shift in light on a ship or recording an unusual pulse, contributed to a growing knowledge base. Humanity was proving that survival did not rely on one person or one group. It relied on the collective effort, creativity, and intelligence of the entire species. The Galactic Council, observing from above, began to recognize the full extent of human unpredictability. They had expected submission, fear, and obedience, but what they found instead was clever strategy, patience, and calm confidence. Humans did not act recklessly, but they did not bow either. They analyzed, observed, and responded in ways that the Council could not fully anticipate. This realization began to make some of the Council members uneasy. They had power beyond comprehension, but humans had something they could not control: their intelligence, creativity, and collective spirit. Human leaders decided it was time to take subtle actions that demonstrated their resourcefulness. They did not launch attacks. There was no need to fight. Instead, they used intelligence and observation to influence the situation. Scientists created small, harmless disruptions in communication signals to see how the aliens would respond. Engineers adjusted energy readings and sent subtle patterns back to the fleet. These actions were careful and controlled, designed to test limits, observe reactions, and demonstrate that humanity could think creatively under pressure. The Council noticed these actions and responded cautiously, realizing that Earth was a Fonso, planet unlike any they had encountered before. As the day progressed, humans began to coordinate in ways that had never been possible before. Global communication allowed teams to share observations, test ideas, and refine strategies in real time. Scientists, students, and citizens contributed to a growing body of knowledge about the Council. Patterns emerged, showing weaknesses, predictable behaviors, and opportunities to interact more effectively. Humans were not just surviving, they were learning how to interact with a species far beyond their technology, using intelligence, patience, and ingenuity rather than weapons. Humans also relied on one of their most powerful tools, humor. Even in moments of tension, jokes and clever phrases kept morale high. People shared stories, memes, and playful observations about the fleet. This was more than entertainment. It was a form of resilience. By laughing, observing, and responding cleverly, humans refused to allow fear to dominate their thoughts or actions. The Council may have been powerful, but humans were proving that courage, intelligence, and humor could level the playing field in ways that brute force could not. Diplomats and scientists worked together to anticipate the Council's next moves. They noticed that the aliens adjusted their energy pulses in response to human communication. Subtle changes in ship movement suggested learning and observation. Humans realized that the Council was attempting to understand them, just as humans were attempting to understand the Council. This mutual observation created a delicate dance, a careful balance of intelligence, wit, and subtle strategy. Humanity was no longer just responding, they were influencing, shaping and testing the situation in ways that the Council could not fully control. As evening approached, humans demonstrated their creativity in unexpected ways. Small drones, built to monitor energy patterns, were deployed in carefully calculated formations. Signals were sent to the fleet using subtle patterns derived from human mathematics, music, and art. These signals were harmless, but highly symbolic, demonstrating intelligence, cooperation, and ingenuity. The Council noticed these signals, puzzled and intrigued by the unexpected methods of communication. Humans were showing that their strengths lay not in violence, but in creativity, adaptability, and collective intelligence. Communities across the planet celebrated small victories. A pattern observed in the alien fleet, a signal decoded, or a subtle reaction to human actions became a point of pride. Even children noticed, marveling at how their observations contributed to the larger effort. Ordinary citizens understood that every small action recording data, sharing insights, or analyzing movements was part of a larger plan. Humanity's strength was not just in leaders or scientists. It was in the participation of the entire species. Everyone had a role to play, and everyone contributed to the growing understanding of the Council and their fleet. By nightfall, humans had achieved something remarkable. They had survived direct observation, learned patterns in alien behavior, influenced reactions through clever strategy, and demonstrated that intelligence and creativity could matter as much as raw power. The Galactic Council was forced to reconsider its assumptions. They had expected submission and fear. Instead, they found intelligence, strategy, humor, and resilience. Humanity was unpredictable, resourceful, and clever, and the Council realized that simple intimidation would not control the species. The lessons of the day were clear. Humans had discovered the importance of observation, patience, and intelligence. They had learned to act subtly, to influence outcomes without direct confrontation, and to maintain humor and morale in the face of overwhelming odds. The Council had learned that humans were unpredictable, clever, and adaptable. Neither side fully controlled the other, but both were learning from the interaction. Humanity's greatest strength was becoming evident: the ability to think creatively, act strategically, and work together as a species. As the night deepened, communities across the world paused to reflect on what had been achieved. Families gathered to discuss observations, students shared ideas, and scientists documented findings. Even in ordinary settings, people recognized the extraordinary reality above them. The alien fleet remained massive and powerful, but humans no longer felt helpless. They were not just surviving, they were influencing, learning, and demonstrating their unique strengths. They were showing that courage, intelligence, and unity could achieve what weapons alone could not. By the end of the 5th day, the planet was transformed. Humans had faced the Council's observation, learned from it, and responded with clever strategy, humor, and intelligence. The species was no longer a passive target. It was an active participant in a cosmic encounter. The Galactic Council had arrived expecting fear and submission, but what they found was cleverness, resilience, and unity. Humans had survived the tests, learned the patterns, and subtly influenced events without risking open conflict. And so, as midnight fell and the alien ships hovered silently above, humanity rested, proud of its accomplishments. They had survived, adapted, and demonstrated qualities that could not be measured in fleet size or technology. The Council had expected submission, but humans had shown intelligence, creativity, courage, and humor. They were unpredictable, resourceful, and united. And in that moment, Earth proved something remarkable. Even in the face of unimaginable power, a species that works together, thinks creatively, and refuses to be intimidated can achieve the impossible. The 6th day began with a quiet energy across Earth. Humanity had survived the initial shock, the ultimatum, the first direct encounter, and even subtle strategic moves against the Galactic Council. People around the world woke with a sense of cautious confidence. For the first time, it felt as if humans were not just being observed, they were being acknowledged. News reports, social media, and conversations buzzed with excitement. Scientists, diplomats, and ordinary citizens all shared a single thought: humanity had proven itself remarkable. Leaders gathered in emergency councils early that morning to plan the day ahead. They were not preparing for a fight. Instead, they focused on communication, observation, and demonstration of human ingenuity. Teams of scientists checked data from the previous days, analyzing energy patterns, signals, and movements of the alien fleet. Engineers tested small, harmless simulations to see how the Council would respond. Every observation, every experiment, and every strategy was part of a careful effort to show humanity's intelligence, resilience, and creativity. Across the world, ordinary people contributed in ways just as important. Students, hobbyists, and amateur scientists shared observations from their own neighborhoods. Communities gathered to record energy pulses, analyze light patterns, and discuss theories about the Council's intentions. Children asked questions that made adults think, sparking new ideas. Even simple actions, like tracking the movement of a small drone or analyzing subtle flashes of light on a ship, became critical. Humanity was not relying on one person or one group. It was relying on the collective intelligence, creativity, and curiosity of the entire species. By mid-morning, the Council responded in an unexpected way. Small portions of the alien fleet descended closer to observe more carefully, but they did not issue threats or demands. Instead, they seemed to study human behavior with genuine curiosity. Scientists noticed that the Council was analyzing human interactions, communication, and even humor. This was a breakthrough. The aliens were no longer focused solely on intimidation. They were trying to understand what made humans unique. Humanity had passed its first real test, not with weapons or power, but with intelligence, resilience, and spirit. Diplomats seized the moment. Carefully crafted messages were sent to the council, combining intelligence, curiosity, and subtle humor. These communications demonstrated that humans were not afraid, that they could respond thoughtfully under pressure, and that they valued learning and understanding. The messages were clear, respectful, and clever, showing confidence without arrogance. Scientists shared their findings in real time, and communities posted observations online. Every citizen, in some way, became part of the global effort to communicate, influence, and demonstrate humanity's uniqueness. The aliens responded with what humans could only interpret as cautious acknowledgement. Their energy pulses became slightly more complex, and their gestures showed subtle patterns that suggested curiosity and engagement. It was as if the council recognized that humans were not a species to be underestimated. For centuries, civilizations had been judged by raw power, technology, or obedience. Earth had none of those advantages compared to the Galactic Council. Yet humans possessed something far more difficult to measure: intelligence, creativity, adaptability, and unity. The Council began to understand that these qualities were their greatest strength. Meanwhile, communities around the world celebrated small victories. People marveled at discoveries, shared clever insights, and documented the Council's reactions to human actions. Scientists and students worked together to refine models of alien behavior. Engineers built simulations to test different responses. Even children contributed by observing patterns in the sky, asking questions, and imagining solutions. These small, individual contributions collectively created a powerful global network of observation, analysis, and insight. Humanity was proving that resilience, intelligence, and creativity were more powerful than fear. By afternoon, humans began to experiment with subtle, symbolic demonstrations. Artists created light patterns and sequences that mirrored signals detected from the fleet. Musicians used sound patterns that echoed the energy pulses observed in the ships. These demonstrations were harmless, creative, and clever, designed to communicate human intelligence and curiosity in ways the Council could perceive without threatening them. The aliens reacted with changes in their energy patterns, indicating awareness and interest. Humanity had discovered a way to communicate across unimaginable differences, using creativity as a bridge between species. Scientists and diplomats also noticed an interesting phenomenon. The Council's approach began to change subtly. Where once the fleet had hovered in silent, imposing lines, it now moved in patterns that suggested adaptation and observation. They seemed to acknowledge human intelligence, learning from each interaction. Humans had not only survived, but they were beginning to earn a measure of respect. The Council's behavior was no longer solely dominant. It had shifted to cautious engagement. The species that had expected submission now had to contend with a civilization that was clever, adaptable, and united. Communities celebrated quietly, sharing stories, sketches, and recordings of the Council's reactions. Ordinary citizens felt pride in their role, realizing that every observation, note, or small experiment contributed to humanity's growing understanding. Children marveled at how their simple questions or observations could influence the bigger picture. Scientists recognized that this was more than just a study of alien technology. It was a study of how humans, collectively, could think, adapt, and influence outcomes on a global scale. It was the embodiment of human ingenuity. As evening approached, the Galactic Council initiated the most remarkable gesture of all. A section of the fleet descended slowly and carefully near a neutral observation area, creating a space where humans could approach safely. There were no weapons displayed, No ultimatums, no threats, only cautious, deliberate observation. Scientists, diplomats, and leaders understood what this meant. Humanity had earned the Council's attention and a measure of respect. The aliens were no longer just observers. They were willing to engage directly on terms that recognized human intelligence, and initiative. Representatives approached with calm confidence. There was no fear, no rush, no sign of panic. Humans spoke clearly, observed carefully, and demonstrated the lessons learned from the previous encounters. The aliens responded with careful gestures, energy pulses, and subtle communications. For the first time, a sense of partnership, however tentative, was forming. Humans were learning the Council's language, and the Council was learning to understand humans. It was a slow, deliberate exchange of intelligence, curiosity, and mutual acknowledgement. During the interaction, a small symbolic gesture became the most profound moment of the day. Scientists transmitted a simple sequence of light and sound that reflected patterns observed in human thought, creativity, and culture. The aliens responded with a mirrored sequence, seemingly acknowledging understanding. It was a quiet, nonverbal handshake across species, a demonstration that intelligence, creativity, and curiosity could transcend unimaginable differences. Humanity had communicated not with force, but with mind, spirit, and ingenuity. As night fell, people across the world reflected on what had happened. Communities gathered, sharing stories, sketches, and insights. Scientists documented findings, students presented observations, and ordinary citizens marveled at how their daily work, curiosity, and observation had contributed to a global achievement. Humanity had survived, adapted, and most importantly, earned a measure of respect from a species whose power dwarfed anything humans had ever known. The lesson was clear. Courage, intelligence, unity, and creativity were as powerful as any weapon. By the end of the 6th day, the Galactic Council had shifted its perception of humanity completely. What they had expected to be a weak, fearful species had proven itself clever, adaptable, and resilient. They understood that Earthlings could not be controlled with intimidation alone. Humans had survived direct observation, subtle strategic tests, and even their first gestures of communication. The Council now approached Earth not as conquerors, but as observers and, in some sense, as learners. Humanity had earned recognition, and perhaps even cautious respect. And so, as midnight settled across the planet, and the alien fleet shimmered silently above, humanity rested with pride and quiet confidence. They had survived, learned, and communicated in ways that transcended fear and brute power. They had proven that intelligence, creativity, unity, and humor could influence even the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Humans had shown the Council and themselves what it meant to be a species defined by resilience, ingenuity, and spirit. For the first time in the encounter, humanity felt not just hope, but a profound understanding of its own strength. They were clever, adaptable, and united. They could survive unimaginable threats, communicate across differences, and earn respect without surrendering autonomy. The Galactic Council had arrived expecting fear, but what they found was courage, intelligence, and the indomitable spirit of humanity. Earth had survived, learned, and triumphed not through weapons, but through the very qualities that made humans extraordinary. And as the stars shone behind the alien fleet, human it